welcome back to the studio. We are kind of perpetually in holiday mode here in the studio, and I used to worry about things like that, but I have to know now from doing this for a few years that regardless of what video I make, I have no control over when someone's going to watch it. And I learned that because we get comments sometimes on videos. Could be a Christmas video in the middle of summer, or Thanksgiving video in February, that people will comment on because that's just when they're seeing it or watching it. And so I've tried to let go of trying to arrange videos to be presented in conjunction with the holiday that they may have a connection to. Today what we're going to be doing is working with one of our laser cut and prefused applique. It's one that I've loved ever since I first saw it. It's called Santa Baby, and this particular one is two little puppies. I think they're like schnauzers, wiener dogs. Is that what you call them, schnauzer? So we actually have a couple versions of this. There's a Batik version and a non-Batik version, kind of a retro dot. That particular one's a little bit more black and white. This one has the blues in it. So I'll probably be doing both of those at some point, but I wanted to go ahead and do this today. It's a nice simple project, and it's another one that I would like to have a new sample of here in the studio. And as you can see from the size of the pattern, it's a fairly small one, so it should be pretty easy today. One of the things I like to do when I first pull my pattern out of the kit is to go ahead and iron it. I use a dry iron, and I just like to get any wrinkles out of the paper pattern because I don't want that to translate any kind of a misposition of one of the pieces of fabric we're going to be using. So I have my paper ironed, and I have my background fabric ironed. A few months back, it was actually during the summer, I went to my local quilt shop, LQS, and I took a bunch of the kits with me, and I picked out a bunch of fabric pieces. I just got 1 yard of each one, and in many cases I didn't need anywhere near a yard, but I didn't want to make it more complicated than it needed to be. So I bought a bunch of backgrounds that matched each of the projects. I brought them home and washed the fabric, which I always do with fabric. I wash it before I bring it in the studio. I just don't want any shrinkage or any bleeding to happen after I make something. So I washed it all, and then I folded each of those fabric pieces around the kit that I wanted it to go with. And this one will be hard to see until you get up close, but it has a little bit of gray in it, and it's little tiny, very fine cross hatching. But it picked out the colors that were already in this particular kit. And I only needed about a 20-inch square, so I've gone ahead and I've washed and dried it. I've ironed it, and I cut it down to about 19 inches. The finished block will only be 18 1/4. But I will worry about that later. So I have the two first things I need to get started. The last thing I need is to pull the contents out of my kit. Now what you see inside the box on our Urban Elements or Applique Elements kits is exactly what's inside. So all of these pieces are already laser cut, they're pre-selected fabric, and they're pre-fused with Steam Seam 2. So at first glance it may seem like they're a little bit expensive for the kit, but when you factor in all of the cutting, all the fabric selection, and the Steam Seam 2, really it's very economical to do a kit. If you had to buy all of the pieces of fabric, it would be a lot more expensive. We do have these patterns available as SVG file, which would be a download that you would use. Download that to a Cameo Silhouette or a Brother Scan and Cut type machine, and you could go ahead and cut out your own fabric pieces, either fused or not fused. But you would have to separate these pieces out because they're all different colors and do them in color sections. We also have this available as just a paper pattern. So I don't know if these are self-print or if we would mail them to you. We probably have both. but you could print these off and use your own fabric and your own applique method. There's over 12, probably far more than that, different ways of appliquing. There's raw edge applique, which is the edge of the fabric is a raw edge, it's not turned under. There's prepared edge applique, where you cut out your shape and then you will turn under the edge, either using an iron or starch or some kind of a fusible material. There's interfacing, where you would sew it to the interfacing and turn it inside out like a pillow. There's needle turn applique, where you would cut out the piece, leaving a seam allowance extending beyond the shape, and then you would needle turn or tuck that edge under as you go. Those are just some of the methods you could use with if you just downloaded the pattern or you purchased just a paper pattern. So there's a lot of ways to do applique. Our kits hopefully just make it the simplest way, where all you really have to do is empty the contents of the kit out, and then we can kind of organize them into shapes and then really get started. So while I'm talking, I'm just going to go ahead and get these pieces out. I always like to keep something for all of the little paper backings to go on. A lot of times if I drop those little paper backings that come off the back of the fabric, they still have a little bit of tackiness on them from the Steam Seam 2, and if that side hits the floor, it makes them kind of hard to sweep up because they're now stuck to the floor. So I like to kind of stack those up, and I usually use my instruction page because I have so many of these instruction pages from doing all the kits. But if you're new to this, maybe you just want to use the plastic bag that the kit came in. There is a full instruction sheet on how this process works, so if you don't have the video handy, you can always just read the instructions. And the really nice thing, I think, is that there's a color cover sheet. This helps you pick out fabric in similar tones and values if you're doing this yourself, but also it helps you organize the pieces and know when there's a lot of similar pieces which one goes where, if you're really that worried about it. So I always keep that handy. And then I usually just separate all of these pieces out into like shapes and make the process go a little bit easier. I can tell these two are my tails. And at some point I'm going to go ahead and get my light box out just to make it a little bit easier to see. And there aren't all that many pieces here today. I usually can tell sort of what these pieces go to just out of habit. I've done so many of these little projects. I always like to see who packed it. It's almost always Vicky. Where'd my glasses go? Oh, this one says packed by R, and I don't know who R is. So I have these separated enough that I think I can go ahead. I'm going to get my light box over here, and then we'll move the camera in a little bit closer so you can watch. I've ironed my placement guide and I've ironed my background fabric. I will be able to trim this fabric down after I'm finished, and then I will take some time and find my background fabric or the border fabric to go with it, so the design pops. So maybe a blue check would be pretty. But I'm going to set the light box up and then we can get started on this. It'll go pretty quick today. You see I'm using my light box today. I would be able to see this without the light box, but I want to make sure that you can see it very well. On the design, some of the shapes have dotted lines, where you can see it's a portion of the shape. The dotted line indicates that that piece goes underneath another piece. So this piece has no dotted lines, that's on top. This portion here has a dotted line, so that gets tucked underneath. So that just gives you a real good placement guide for where the shapes go. And you really can start anywhere, but I usually start with some of the larger shapes to get those going. All of the pieces have a paper backing on them. That's the Steam-A-Seam 2. And generally, just by slightly bending over the piece, you can catch the edge and peel that paper off. This is just a little bit sticky, and this is what I try and keep from falling onto the floor. So I'm going to put all my papers to the side, and then I can go ahead and lay this in place. Really, it's kind of relaxing to be out here in the studio. It's kind of a stress reliever for me to be able to work on a project. And it's nice to be able to have a project where everything is already pretty much held together for you. If I was going to do this from scratch, I'd have to go through the fabric and do all my fabric selection and cutting out all the pieces and tracing, which is fun on its own, but sometimes you don't have that much time, but you still want to have some sewing time, and you want to have that sense of accomplishment. And so it's really nice to be able to have a kit like this that you can work with. I'm going to end up with my belly picking up pieces. These types of kits also are fun to work with other people. I often think the idea of having somebody help you with it and then gift it to them later is very nice, because they have both the memory of you working together on it, but also as the gift, and it just makes a really nice memento. And that could be a friend, or it could be children or grandchildren. If you have young children, you could have them help or play with this just as a puzzle piece and have them find out where the pieces go without doing any peeling. If they're a little bit older, maybe they could help you peel the paper off the backing and put them in place. This one has quite a few large pieces, so it'll go together pretty quick. I picked up one of my pieces from the back. If during this process you put one piece under the other or over the other that was a mistake, you can always lift it back up. These pieces are tacky and they're sticking to the background, but they won't be adhered into place until we fuse it. Just like this goes behind. I knew my stomach was guilty of knocking a piece off the table. I always love this Santa hat shape. You'll see it in a couple different sizes here. If you ever have a problem with the Steam-A-Seam 2 not sticking to the fabric, you can always just hit it with the iron. You know, after you put the paper backing back in place, hit it with the iron, let it cool, and then you can peel the paper backing off as normal. With all of these legs, there's always a rounded side and a square side. The rounded side is always exposed. That's the bottom of the feet. And then the square part just gets tucked under the body. I've done so many of these little chickadees because it's almost one of our little mascots. If you have a problem with the paper backing and you just can't seem to get it to come loose, what you could do is take some kind of a pen and just score the paper with the pen. Could be a seam ripper or the tip of a scissors. If you just run the sharp point along that fat paper, then you bend it where the paper is, you'll see that you'll get enough of the paper to come up that you can peel the paper away. This is one of the smallest pieces, the beak. It's usually where I struggle the most, trying to keep a hold of it. At some point, I'm going to have a week or two where I just go through and quilt some of these samples up. I have quite a few of the applique that I haven't quilted yet. Wow, you can see how fast this goes. All I have left are the eyes. I have one yellow. That's going to be my chickadee eye. These little eyes are like ultra suede, and those are the trickiest ones to work with. If the fusible web is going to come loose from the fabric, this is the most common one it's going to come loose from. Because it's a little bit thicker, it takes a little bit more pressure to keep it in place. And also it's thicker, so it takes a few seconds more for that heat to transfer through to bond it in place. Now each one of these wiener dogs has one larger eye and one smaller eye. There's supposed to be a little bit of a perspective thing going on there. Now I always like to take a second and look at this from both the front and the back to make sure I have everything in place and if anything is distracting. As I said, each of the pieces are repositionable at this point, so if you need to, you can move them about. But I'm going to test something with the light on and off. I was concerned about that piece showing through the white backing. You can see here and here that it shows through just a little bit. And if that is distracting to you, you could always go ahead and snip that piece off before you get to the fusing. But you can see pretty much once the background is not illuminated, it's not showing through as much. So that's up to you if you wanted to do that or not. I can see that my ear is not quite in place. It may be off a little bit, but I'd rather it match this fabric than the pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the light box. I'm going to get rid of all my little pieces of backing paper, and I'm going to get set up to fuse this so we could go ahead and wrap this quick project up. I've taken a good look and everything is pretty well positioned where I want it. I did go ahead and cut out those two pieces just so it doesn't show up in the quilting process or anything. And I'm going to go ahead and prep this for ironing. I don't keep any water in my iron, that way the iron doesn't leak. So Steam 2 does require steam component for the fusible process to work. If you ever have Steam 2 and it's not bonding properly, that may be the reason. If you're using a dry iron, it does require steam. So I have the moisture from the spray bottle. It's just plain water. And I like to use a Teflon pressing sheet. And I'm just going to go ahead and start at the top and give a little bit of weight to that with my hand. Now, because I'm using the Teflon pressing sheet, I will have to add a few seconds to the time I use to bond the product. That heat has to transfer through the Teflon pressing sheet and then through each layer of both fabric and fusible to get to the background. So you need to account for all of that, and depending on the heat setting of your iron, your location will have some impact on that. The quality of the iron and other factors may influence how long it takes. So I'm not going to be able to give you like a 10-second rule or a 12-second rule or an 8-second rule. You're just going to have to play a little bit to find that out yourself. I will say where there's areas where there's multiple layers to go through, like you have the hat, the ear, the face, the body, and then the background, I would give that a little bit longer time with the iron. Also, when I'm done, I always like to turn the entire block over, respray it with the water, and then fuse it from the backside down, so that we're absolutely making sure that we're getting a complete permanent bond with the Steam-A-Seam 2 or whatever fusible we happen to be using. If it's our kit, it's going to be Steam-A-Seam 2. The Teflon pressing sheet also does a few other things. It prevents, if the iron were to sputter or self-clean, it's not going to get any sputters on the background fabric or on our kit pieces. It also protects the iron itself in case any fusible material should come out from the edges and get stuck to the sole plate of the iron. The Teflon pressing sheet will prevent that. It also, we should be picking the iron up and moving it to a new location on the piece. If you slide it sideways without the Teflon pressing sheet, sometimes you can catch the edge of the applique. It crinkles up underneath the iron, and then you're fusing it incorrectly because you can't see that it's all crinkled up. So the Teflon pressing sheet protects the edges of the applique and keeps them really well in shape. I always get antsy at this point and feel like I should hurry and finish. But sometimes you just can't finish until you're finished. So after I fuse it, I can feel it to see if it's dry. The eyes are a particular area where you really have to give it some time to fuse through because those are thick. So that would be here, here, and here. So I fused it from the front. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process. I'm just going to generally see where the applique shapes are and spritz that area with the water to make sure I get a really good bond. If you are doing any type of top stitching on your project later, some people like to top stitch around the applique. That's not something we do, but you're certainly able to do that. Also, many of our samples are quilted, and if you are doing that and you're getting a lot of gumming on the needle, that's an indication that at this stage you did not fuse long enough. You cannot overfuse Steam-A-Seam 2. It's not going to evaporate and go away. So if there's gumming on the needle, then you haven't fused long enough, and next time you get to doing another kit with Steam-A-Seam 2, you'll know to take a little bit more time to fuse it. Many of our early samples were quilted with clear or smoke monopoly thread. I'm not a particularly huge fan of that. I have done videos with it showing you how that works, but it's not my favorite type of thread to use. I don't mind a little bit of colored thread on top of the applique, so I just use whatever would make me happy for that project. And I hope you can see the steam coming up from the kit, from my block, which is proof that just spraying the applique is sufficient to create the steam to activate the bonding agent. When ironing from the back, I don't really have to worry about crinkling up any of the pieces. But I do want to make sure I get right over where all of the eyes are to make sure that those are really well bonded. So just like that, we have our finished block. And in real time, you can see that this really didn't take that long. So we can see that we look pretty well like our color cover sheet here. I can put that back. I can flip my Teflon pressing sheet out of the way. And we have a beautiful block that really didn't take that long at all. This would be a great project again for working with friends or family. And once you have this stage, I mean, this also could be put on a variety of products like a backpack, pre-made backpack, or a knapsack, or it could be bonded onto wood, glass, metal, plastic. We have pieces on glass jars and wood boxes that we've done videos on as well. You could do a beautiful pillow with this. This would be a almost perfect size for a pillow. What I'm going to do is find a really nice border fabric and put a border on it, and then I can just quilt it up as one of our little samples. But I really like the Christmas theme on these, the Santa babies. So I think it's adorable, and it's just a fun thing to do. So I want to thank you for stopping by the studio today, spending some time with me. It was a pretty quiet day around here. We've really just passed the holidays, and that's when things quiet down and it's kind of into the solitude of the winter solstice. But I want to thank you for stopping by and spending a little bit of time with me, not too long. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Santa babies.